On January 15, 1947, a mother walking with her daughter through a Los Angeles vacant lot saw what she first mistook for a broken mannequin. It was the body of Elizabeth Short, severed cleanly at the waist, drained of blood, posed with surgical precision. Hollywood had just witnessed its darkest unsolved murder. Part 1. The Body in the Grass. The morning of January 15, 1947, begins with Betty Bersinger walking her 3-year-old daughter to a shoe repair shop along Norton Avenue in Leimert Park. The neighborhood is quiet, post-war Los Angeles waking slowly under pale winter light. Betty notices something white in the vacant lot. A discarded store mannequin, she assumes. Then she sees the legs, positioned apart at an unnatural angle. She shields her daughter's eyes and runs to a nearby house to call police. First responding officers arrive at 10:35 a.m. What they find defies comprehension. A young woman's body, bisected at the waist with medical precision, the two halves placed approximately 1 foot apart. The body has been completely drained of blood, washed clean, and posed deliberately. Arms raised above the head, legs spread. Deep lacerations extend from the corners of her mouth toward her ears, creating a grotesque smile. There are rope marks on the wrists, ankles, and neck. The grass beneath her is dry. Not a drop of blood at the scene. This was a display, not a murder site. Captain Jack Donahoe of the LAPD Homicide Division takes command. Within hours, reporters swarm Norton Avenue. The investigation that will consume Los Angeles and haunt American criminal history has begun. And now, before this story unfolds further, may I take a small portion of your time and subscribe to this channel. Join thousands of history lovers on this journey through time. If this tale has earned your attention, a like and a comment go a long way. Tell us, where in the world are you watching from? These stories have traveled centuries to reach you. Let us continue. The Los Angeles County Coroner's Office receives the body by midday. Dr. Frederick Newbar performs the autopsy and documents injuries that suggest prolonged torture. Contusions across the head, hemorrhaging in the scalp indicating repeated blows while she was alive, lacerations on both breasts, and evidence that the bisection occurred post-mortem with a surgical instrument. The cause of death: hemorrhage and shock from blows to the head combined with lacerations of the face. Meanwhile, LAPD faces an immediate problem: identification. The victim has no identification, no clothing, nothing. Detectives take her fingerprints and send them via the new sound photo technology to the FBI in Washington, a process that takes mere hours instead of days. The Los Angeles Examiner, in a controversial move, also obtains the prints and transmits them independently. The FBI matches the prints by evening. Elizabeth Short, age 22, arrested in Santa Barbara in 1943 for underage drinking. A name emerges, but the woman behind it remains a mystery. Detectives begin reconstructing her final weeks, unaware they are entering a labyrinth with no exit. To understand Elizabeth Short's death, investigators must understand her life. Born July 29, 1924, in Hyde Park, Boston, Elizabeth was the third of 5 daughters born to Cleo and Phoebe Short. Her father built miniature golf courses, a booming business until the Depression crushed it. In 1930, Cleo abandoned the family, faking his suicide by leaving his car near a bridge. Phoebe raised her daughters alone in Medford, Massachusetts, in grinding poverty. Elizabeth grew into a striking girl with pale skin, blue-gray eyes, and jet-black hair. She suffered from chronic bronchitis and asthma. Massachusetts winters were slowly killing her. Doctors recommended a warmer climate. At 17, she began spending winters in Miami with family friends. She worked as a waitress, dreamed of Hollywood, and cultivated an air of mystery that would later complicate investigations. In 1942, Cleo resurfaced. Alive, living in California, working at Mare Island Naval Shipyard. Elizabeth, now 18, moved west to live with the father who had abandoned her. Their reunion lasted months before explosive arguments drove her out. She would never reconcile with him. The fractured father-daughter relationship becomes a recurring theme investigators will later explore. Elizabeth drifts through wartime California and Florida. A beautiful young woman surrounded by soldiers and sailors, yet strangely isolated. In Camp Cook, later Vandenberg Air Force Base, she is voted Camp Cutie by servicemen. She works briefly at the base PX. Stories circulate about her. Some call her aloof. Others say she dated multiple men but never became intimate. Her nickname, the Black Dahlia, allegedly originates at a Long Beach drugstore in 1946, inspired by her jet black hair, preference for black clothing, and the film The Blue Dahlia, starring Veronica Lake. She returns to Florida in 1945 and falls deeply in love with Major Matthew Gordon, a decorated Army Air Forces pilot. They become engaged. In August 1945, Gordon dies in a plane crash in India, just days before the war's end. Elizabeth is devastated. She tells friends and family she was his widow, though they never married. Some investigators will later question whether the relationship was as serious as she claimed. Others see a heartbroken young woman constructing a more romantic narrative to cope with loss. By late in 46, Elizabeth returns to California with Hollywood dreams and virtually no money. She is about to enter the final, fatal chapter of her life. Elizabeth Short arrives in Los Angeles in July 1946, joining thousands of young women chasing stardom in a city that devours them. She has no stable address, no steady income, and no realistic prospects in the film industry. She survives by staying with friends, acquaintances, and men she meets at bars and hotels. She moves constantly: the Biltmore Hotel, private homes in Long Beach, Hollywood apartments. Investigators will eventually identify over 20 different addresses in her final 6 months. She frequents cocktail lounges in Hollywood and downtown Los Angeles, always immaculately dressed despite her poverty. Witnesses describe her as a party girl who drank little but talked constantly about breaking into pictures. She carried a small black book with names and addresses, a detail that will later drive investigators to obsession. She writes letters home filled with optimism. A screen test is coming. An important producer has taken interest. None of it is true. The contrast between Elizabeth's constructed fantasy and her desperate reality becomes a central tragedy of the case. A young woman slowly drowning while pretending to swim. The last confirmed sighting of Elizabeth Short alive, January 9, 1947, at the Biltmore Hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Witness Robert Red Manley, a traveling salesman, drives her there after she stays at a motel in San Diego with him the previous night. Manley will become the first major suspect, and the investigation's first dead end. Manley's story: he met Elizabeth on December 8, 1946, at a San Diego nightclub. She was waiting for someone who never arrived. He offered to help. Weeks later, she called him, needing a ride to Los Angeles. He drove her north on January 9th, dropped her at the Biltmore around 6:30 p.m., and never saw her again. Elizabeth told him she was meeting her sister. She had no sister in Los Angeles. The Biltmore's lobby buzzes with evening activity. A doorman and bellboy recall seeing Elizabeth make a phone call, then exit through the south entrance onto Olive Street. She walks into the Los Angeles night and vanishes. 6 days later, she appears in a vacant lot, posed like a broken doll. What happened in between becomes the central mystery, one that will never be solved with certainty. Part 2. The Investigation. The LAPD mounts its largest investigation in department history. Over 750 officers work the case. Captain Donahoe establishes a dedicated task force at Central Division, and tips flood in, dozens per hour. Elizabeth's photograph appears in every Los Angeles newspaper, and the press gives the investigation its sensational framework. A beautiful victim, a monstrous crime, a city gripped by fear. Red Manley is arrested immediately. Police subject him to 2 polygraph tests, then a novel technology, interrogate him for days, and search his car for blood evidence. He passes both polygraphs. His alibi for January 10th, 14th holds. He was working in San Diego, verifiable through sales receipts and witnesses. His wife confirms he was home on the nights in question. Reluctantly, detectives release him. Manley's life is destroyed anyway. His name connected to the Dahlia forever, his marriage strained, his mental health deteriorating until his death in 1986. Meanwhile, detectives canvass every hotel, bar, and rooming house in Los Angeles. Elizabeth Short talked to many people, but no one truly knew her. The picture emerging is of a woman with hundreds of acquaintances and no real friends, a social phantom who revealed nothing while appearing to share everything. Dr. Newbar's autopsy report becomes the investigation's foundational document and its greatest source of controversy. The bisection was performed with surgical skill, the blade passing cleanly between the second and third lumbar vertebrae. This suggests medical training, or at least butchering experience. The body was drained of blood and washed thoroughly, possibly in a bathtub. Rope marks indicate prolonged restraint. The facial lacerations were inflicted while Elizabeth was alive. Toxicology finds no alcohol or drugs in her system. Stomach contents reveal feces, a detail suppressed from public release, suggesting forced ingestion. The full extent of injuries, some of which were published and some withheld, point to sadistic torture over an extended period, possibly 24 to 48 hours. Investigators develop early theories. The killer has medical or mortuary training. He has access to a private location with plumbing. He owns a vehicle large enough to transport the body. He is organized, methodical, and experienced. This is not his first crime. The profile fits dozens of men in Los Angeles. It fits no one specifically. The suspect pool grows to overwhelming proportions. Detectives identify and interview over 100 men connected to Elizabeth Short in any capacity: former boyfriends, casual acquaintances, hotel clerks, bartenders, soldiers she corresponded with. Each interview produces more names, more leads, and more frustration. Key early suspects include Mark Hansen, a nightclub owner whose Hollywood home Elizabeth had stayed at briefly. Hansen's address was in her belongings. He had connections to the entertainment underworld, owned property where a body could be hidden, and had relationships with many young women. But Hansen provides alibis, and no physical evidence connects him to the crime. Dr. George Hodel, a prominent Los Angeles physician, enters the investigation peripherally. His name appears in Elizabeth's address book. Investigators note his medical training and unusual lifestyle, but find no direct link. Hodel will become the most famous suspect decades later, accused by his own son in a best-selling book. In 1947, he is questioned and released. The pattern repeats endlessly. Promising suspect, intensive investigation, insufficient evidence, release. The killer leaves no fingerprints, no witnesses, no traceable vehicle, nothing. On January 21st, the Los Angeles Examiner receives a strange package. A handwritten note composed of letters cut from newspaper headlines reads, "Here is Dahlia's belongings. Letter to follow." Inside, Elizabeth's Social Security card, birth certificate, photographs, and an address book with Mark Hansen's name embossed on the cover. One page has been torn out. The items have been washed with gasoline to remove fingerprints. The address book's missing page becomes the investigation's obsession. Whose name was on it? The killer, presumably. The man Elizabeth was meeting at the Biltmore. Someone she trusted enough to leave with willingly. More letters follow. Ask newsman Drew Pearson about Dahlia killers, one reads. Another, Dahlia's killer cracking, wants terms. Handwriting analysis proves inconclusive. Some letters are obvious hoaxes, but investigators believe the first package is genuine, the killer taunting them, enjoying the attention, reveling in a game they cannot win. The letters stop after January 26th. The killer retreats into silence, leaving investigators with a corpse, a handful of belongings, and infinite questions. The Black Dahlia case transforms Los Angeles journalism, for the worse. Competition between the Examiner, Herald Express, Daily News, and Times creates a feeding frenzy. Reporters bribe police officers for information, stake out Elizabeth's family, and publish increasingly lurid speculation as fact. Werewolf killer sought, screams one headline. Another calls Elizabeth a party girl who liked men. The press assault on Elizabeth's reputation begins immediately. Reporters portray her as sexually promiscuous, implying she somehow invited her fate. Her letters to soldiers are published without context. Her movements between addresses become evidence of moral failure rather than poverty. The victim is blamed, and the killer recedes into anonymity while Elizabeth's name is dragged through ink. Phoebe Short, Elizabeth's mother, is interviewed within days of the identification. Reporters told her they were looking for Elizabeth regarding a beauty contest before revealing her daughter's murder. The cruelty becomes legendary, symbolic of an era's callousness toward victims and families. Phoebe never recovers from her daughter's death or its aftermath. She dies in 1992, still waiting for answers. The Black Dahlia case transforms Los Angeles journalism, for the worse. Competition between the Examiner, Herald Express, Daily News, and Times creates a feeding frenzy. Reporters bribe police officers for information, stake out Elizabeth's family, and publish increasingly lurid speculation as fact. Werewolf killer sought, screams one headline. Another calls Elizabeth a party girl who liked men. The press assault on Elizabeth's reputation begins immediately. Reporters portray her as sexually promiscuous, implying she somehow invited her fate. Her letters to soldiers are published without context. Her movements between addresses become evidence of moral failure rather than poverty. The victim is blamed, and the killer recedes into anonymity while Elizabeth's name is dragged through ink. Phoebe Short, Elizabeth's mother, is interviewed within days of the identification. Reporters told her they were looking for Elizabeth regarding a beauty contest before revealing her daughter's murder. The cruelty becomes legendary, symbolic of an era's callousness toward victims and families. Phoebe never recovers from her daughter's death or its aftermath. She dies in 1992, still waiting for answers. Within weeks, police receive confessions, then dozens more. Eventually, over 500 people will claim responsibility for Elizabeth Short's murder. The confessions become a case study in criminal psychology. Why do innocent people confess to crimes they didn't commit? Some are mentally ill, craving attention or punishment. Others are alcoholics with fragmented memories who genuinely believe they might have killed someone. A few are publicity seekers. Many simply want to be part of something larger than their ordinary lives. Each confession requires investigation. Alibis must be checked, claimed details verified against withheld evidence. The process consumes thousands of man-hours. One confessor describes the murder location accurately: a hotel room downtown. Investigators track him obsessively before discovering he read the detail in an obscure newspaper story. Another provides accurate descriptions of the body's injuries, information leaked by a police officer paid by reporters. The false confessions pollute the evidentiary record and exhaust detectives already stretched thin. By spring 1947, investigators recognize they are no closer to an arrest than on January 16th. The case that should have defined careers is becoming an abyss that ends them. Part 3. Descent into Shadows. In February 1947, a Cleveland newspaper editor writes to LAPD with a troubling comparison. Between 1935 and 1938, Cleveland's Kingsbury Run neighborhood witnessed 12 murders with chilling similarities to the Dahlia case. Victims decapitated and dismembered, bodies drained of blood and washed clean, disposal sites staged for discovery. The Cleveland torso murders remain unsolved. Investigators explore possible connections. Could the Dahlia killer be the torso murderer, relocated to Los Angeles? The dismemberment method differs. Cleveland's killer removed heads and limbs. The Dahlia killer bisected at the waist. But the signature elements align. Exsanguination. Washing. Posing. Taunting of authorities. Legendary detective Elliot Ness, who investigated the Cleveland murders, offers his files. No definitive link is established, but the Cleveland comparison introduces a horrifying possibility. Elizabeth Short's killer may be a serial murderer, a term barely in use in 1947. If so, there may be other victims, unconnected, unidentified, scattered across the country. The investigation expands geographically, chasing patterns across state lines, finding shadows everywhere and substance nowhere. The precision of Elizabeth's bisection haunts investigators. Who in 1947 Los Angeles possesses this capability? Surgeons, obviously, and the city has thousands. Medical students, morticians and butchers also qualify. Even skilled hunters might manage the cut with practice. LAPD obtains lists of local surgeons and cross-references them against Elizabeth's known contacts. Dr. George Hodel resurfaces in discussions. He studied surgery, ran a venereal disease clinic, and had a reputation for unconventional behavior. But dozens of other physicians fit similar profiles. Walter Bailey, a surgeon who lived blocks from the disposal site and was experiencing personal turmoil in January 1947, becomes another person of interest. The investigation briefly turns to medical schools, checking for students who dropped out or exhibited disturbing behavior. Mortuaries are canvassed. Elizabeth's body was handled by someone comfortable with death. Slaughterhouses provide lists of skilled butchers. Each theory generates suspects. None generates evidence. The medical expertise required to commit this crime paradoxically makes the killer harder to identify. There are simply too many qualified candidates. Elizabeth Short wanted to be a movie star, and Hollywood in 1947 is filled with predators who exploit that desire. Investigators delve into the seamy underside of the film industry, where aspiring actresses are routinely exploited by men promising screen tests that never materialize. Elizabeth's movements reveal encounters with several entertainment industry figures. She attended parties at private homes, met men who claimed connections to studios, and may have participated in informal auditions. The casting couch is an open secret. Young women trade sexual favors for introductions that lead nowhere. Mark Hansen, the nightclub owner whose address book was sent to police, becomes emblematic of this world. He surrounded himself with young women, housing some at his property, photographing them, introducing them to associates. His Florentine Gardens nightclub hosted a demimonde of criminals, entertainers, and Hollywood aspirants. Elizabeth entered this orbit briefly. Did she encounter her killer there? Hansen remains a suspect throughout 1947. Interviewed repeatedly, his properties searched. Investigators find nothing conclusive. He dies in 1964, taking whatever secrets he possessed to his grave. In June 1947, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel is assassinated in Beverly Hills, shot through his living room window. The murder remains unsolved, and certain investigators see connections to the Dahlia case. Both crimes display theatrical elements, staged, public, meant to send a message. Could organized crime be involved in Elizabeth's death? The theory proposes Elizabeth witnessed something she shouldn't have, knew someone connected to the mob, or became entangled in criminal enterprises beyond her understanding. Los Angeles in 1947 is controlled by competing criminal factions: Mickey Cohen's organization, Jack Dragna's family, remnants of Siegel's empire. Violence is commonplace, and witnesses have a habit of disappearing. However, no evidence links Elizabeth Short to organized crime beyond proximity. She frequented bars and nightclubs where criminals also socialized. The Dahlia murders methodology doesn't match mob executions, which tend toward efficiency rather than prolonged torture. Still, the theory persists in popular imagination, suggesting Elizabeth stumbled into something larger than herself. Investigators pursue the angle through 1947 without results. Organized crime figures have alibis or refuse to cooperate. The underworld maintains its silence. By autumn 1947, the investigation has stalled. Active leads are exhausted. The task force shrinks from hundreds of officers to a skeleton crew. Captain Donahoe is reassigned. The case files grow thicker with dead ends, but no closer to resolution. Other crimes demand attention to Los Angeles's post-war crime wave continues. Robberies, rapes, murders. The Dahlia case becomes one file among thousands, exceptional only in its brutality and publicity. Detectives continue interviewing occasional tips, but the urgency fades. The killer has won. Elizabeth's family endures quiet devastation. Phoebe Short relocates from Massachusetts, unable to escape her daughter's notoriety. Elizabeth's sisters marry, have children, and carry the burden of association with the Dahlia name. The case becomes true crime legend, written about in pulp magazines, referenced in crime novels, transformed from tragedy to entertainment. By 1949, the LAPD effectively closes active investigation. The file remains open. Murder has no statute of limitations, but the manhunt is over. Whoever killed Elizabeth Short has vanished as completely as she did between January 9th and January 15th, 1947. The 1950s bring periodic resurgences of interest. Each year, someone comes forward with new information, claims to know the killer, or confesses. Each lead is investigated and dismissed. The pattern established in 1947 continues indefinitely. Dr. George Hodel flees to the Philippines in 1950 after a scandal involving accusations of incest with his teenage daughter. The charges are dropped, but Hodel never returns permanently to the United States. His departure strikes some investigators as suspicious. Was he fleeing justice? The accusation will resurface decades later. Leslie Dillon, a bellhop with psychological issues, contacts a psychiatrist claiming knowledge of the killer. The psychiatrist alerts police, and Dillon is intensively interrogated. He provides details that match crime scene evidence, raising suspicions. How does he know? But Dillon's information proves obtainable from newspaper accounts. He is released. The 1950s end with the case no closer to solution than 1947. The Dahlia becomes myth, her story retold in increasingly distorted forms. Elizabeth Short, the person, the asthmatic girl from Massachusetts, the heartbroken almost widow, the desperate dreamer, disappears into Elizabeth Short, the symbol. Part 4. Legacy of Shadows. The Black Dahlia enters American popular culture, a process that simultaneously preserves and distorts her memory. John Gilmore's 1994 book, Severed, represents decades of research, interviewing surviving witnesses, proposing suspects, and attempting to humanize Elizabeth beyond the tabloid narrative. Earlier true crime accounts proliferate in magazines and cheap paperbacks, treating the murder as titillation rather than tragedy. James Elroy, whose own mother was murdered when he was 10, writes The Black Dahlia in 1987, a fictionalized account that becomes a bestseller and introduces the case to new generations. Elroy explicitly connects his obsession with Elizabeth to his mother's unsolved murder, finding in the Dahlia case a mirror for his own trauma. The novel's success spawns film adaptations, documentaries, and endless imitation. Each retelling adds layers of mythology. Elizabeth becomes a femme fatale, a fallen woman, a Hollywood martyr, anything but the complicated, struggling young woman she actually was. The truth recedes further into shadow, replaced by compelling fiction. By the 1980s, more people know the legend than the facts. In 2003, retired LAPD homicide detective Steve Hodel publishes Black Dahlia Avenger, accusing his own father, Dr. George Hodel, of Elizabeth Short's murder. The book becomes a sensation, offering something the case had lacked for 56 years, a named suspect with extensive circumstantial evidence. Steve Hodel's case is compelling. His father had medical training sufficient for the bisection. George Hodel knew Elizabeth Short. Her photograph was found among his possessions after his 1999 death. The elder Hodel was investigated for the murder in 1947 and was placed under surveillance, during which police allegedly recorded incriminating statements. George Hodel's character was demonstrably predatory. The incest accusation. His association with surrealist art circles obsessed with death imagery. His flight to the Philippines. Critics note problems. The surveillance transcripts are ambiguous. George Hodel was never arrested. The connection between Hodel and Elizabeth beyond a photograph remains unproven. Steve Hodel's motives, while apparently sincere, involve exposing his own father, a psychologically fraught endeavor. The accusation satisfies many observers while persuading few experts. The case remains officially unsolved. George Hodel is not the only accused. The Black Dahlia case generates perpetual suspects, each proposed by researchers, amateur investigators, and descendants with guilty family secrets. Dr. Walter Bailey, the surgeon who lived near the dump site, is accused by his own family members decades after his 1948 death. Bailey was experiencing a mental breakdown in January 1947, separated from his wife, and may have known Elizabeth through his daughter. The theory is plausible but unprovable. Bailey left no confession, and physical evidence no longer exists. Orson Welles is absurdly accused in one account, based on his magic skills and proximity to Hollywood. The accusation illuminates how the case attracts fantasists. Less absurdly, various soldiers Elizabeth corresponded with during the war are proposed and eliminated. A Cleveland suspect from the Torso murders is connected by some researchers. The multiplication of suspects represents both the case's enduring fascination and its fundamental insolubility. When evidence is absent, imagination fills the void. Everyone becomes potentially guilty because no one is proven innocent. 78 years after Elizabeth Short's murder, what can be stated with certainty? Elizabeth Short was killed between January 10th and January 15th, 1947, at an unknown location. She was tortured for an extended period, possibly 24 to 48 hours. The cause of death was hemorrhage and shock from blows to the head. Her body was bisected post-mortem, drained of blood, washed clean, and transported to Norton Avenue, where it was posed for discovery. The killer possessed medical or surgical knowledge, access to a private location, and a vehicle. Beyond these facts, everything is inference. The killer knew Elizabeth at least casually. She left the Biltmore willingly. He likely lived in Los Angeles and understood the city's geography. He was organized, patient, and controlled, suggesting prior criminal experience. He sought publicity but left no traceable evidence. What we don't know encompasses everything else: his name, his motive, whether Elizabeth was his only victim, where he killed her, how he transported her, and what happened to him afterward. He may have died anonymously decades ago, his secret intact. He may have killed again, his other victims unconnected to the Dahlia. He may be among the hundreds of named suspects, or entirely unknown to investigators. The case is unsolvable with current evidence. Only the killer knew the truth, and he chose eternal silence. Beneath the sensationalism lies Elizabeth Short, not the Black Dahlia, but a young woman whose 22 years contained more tragedy than her murder alone. She was born into poverty, abandoned by her father, driven from home by illness, bereaved of her fiancé, and failed by every system meant to protect her. Her crime was dreaming too large for her circumstances. Elizabeth's letters home reveal someone clinging to optimism despite evidence. She reassured her mother that success was imminent while counting coins for meals. She constructed elaborate fantasies about screen tests and important connections that existed only in her hope. She was not promiscuous. Medical evidence confirmed she had physical abnormalities making intercourse painful or impossible. The party girl image was press fabrication. She is buried at Mountain View Cemetery in Oakland, California, far from Hollywood, far from Los Angeles, far from the vacant lot where she was displayed like broken sculpture. Her grave marker reads simply, Elizabeth Short, July 29, 1924, January 15, 1947. Daughter. The monument her memory deserves would acknowledge her humanity rather than her death. But history rarely grants that kindness. On winter mornings in Los Angeles, fog rolls in from the Pacific and settles in the flat neighborhoods south of downtown. Leimert Park has changed since 1947. The vacant lot is long developed, the city transformed, but something lingers. The Black Dahlia case persists because it refuses closure, because it represents every unsolved murder, every victim forgotten except as entertainment. Elizabeth Short died anonymous and became infamous. Her killer lived anonymous and remained so. The imbalance seems cosmically unjust, the victim forever exposed, the perpetrator forever hidden. Every theory, every book, every documentary attempts to rectify this imbalance, to name the nameless evil and grant Elizabeth peace. None succeeds entirely. The case endures as a mirror reflecting American obsessions: celebrity, violence, female vulnerability, institutional failure. Elizabeth wanted Hollywood. Hollywood consumed her, transformed her death into spectacle, and profited endlessly from her suffering. The investigation that should have delivered justice instead delivered entertainment. Perhaps the truest lesson is the simplest. Elizabeth Short was a person, complicated, struggling, hopeful, doomed. She deserved life, deserved safety, deserved to become whoever she might have been. Instead, she became the Black Dahlia, Hollywood's dark enigma, a question mark etched into history's margin. The question remains unanswered. Perhaps it always will.